Hi, my name is Gabriel with Mathout, and today I'm going to be showing you how to pick wood for woodworking projects. So get excited. We're going to be talking about different wood types, how wood grows, grain orientation, going to sawmills, and if we have time, we'll talk about defects. Let's go into it. So types of wood. We got our softwood and our hardwood. This is how wood is generally spoken of. Here's the thing. Softwood is not necessarily softer than hardwood. It's in general terms, softwood is generally softer, depending on the species of wood. For example, if you look down here, yew is definitely harder than basswood or balsa. So what are the key differences in terms of softwood and hardwood? Well, I'm not a botanist, so I don't exactly know how to pronounce the actual terms, the terminology for them. All I know is that softwood generally has needles and hardwood generally have leaves. Hardwood are fruit-bearing trees. They have a more complex structure. They're often porous. Typically there's less branches and more forks inside of a hardwood, so there's less knots. And in colder temperature where I live in Canada, hardwood will lose their leaves in very colorful manners in the fall. That doesn't mean that softwood does not lose their leaves, because sometimes softwood will lose their leaves. Now they have needles. They usually their seeds are either in cones or naked. Naked. They grow faster. They're often used for construction purposes because they grow faster and because they grow nice and straight. They are most often found in colder climates or in mountains and stuff like that. In terms of construction lumber, where I live, there's this category which is SPF, which stands for spruce, pine, and fir. Those are all softwoods, so is cedar and yew. In terms of hardwoods, you'll find maple, oak, birch, zebra wood, purple hearts, cherry, ebony, basswood, balsa. The thing is that these are just examples. There are tons of different types of wood out there, and you have to experiment between them to really know their, characteristics. All right, let's talk about tree growth. It's important to understand how a tree grows for woodworking. Most of us understand that trees have annual growth rings. The cambium layer, which is the very outside layer, is where these growth rings happen. When there's more liquids in the air, the tree will grow faster, and as things dry up, it will grow slower, and that's basically how the annual growth rings form. On the inside of the cambium layer, we have our sapwood. Our sapwood is where all the nutrients of the tree is. It's usually lighter in color, it has more pores, it absorbs stains and treatments better, it will dry faster, and it will have more expansion, so it's less stable. We have medullary rays that bring the nutrients to the cambium layer, and in the inside of the sapwood we have our heartwood. Heartwood is dead sapwood cells. It's usually darker, more dense, more stable. It's a layer that most woodworkers want to work with the most. On the inside, the very center, we have the pitch. The pitch is the very center of the tree. It's often attacked by insects and fungi. So, here's an example of a piece of cedar. You'll see the middle is attacked. And if you go to sawmills, you'll see this often, big holes in the middle. It's important to know that. When you buy lumber, you look to see if the pitch is inside there, because often you'll see a crack going from the center all the way up to the edge because of drying and whatever. It's often the case. So we're talking about grain structure. What is grain? Well, grain, we see it as the annual rings. Now, we have three different terminologies when it comes to grain structure. We got the flat sawn, rift sawn, and quarter sawn, and of course, subscribe. First one we're going to be looking at is the flat sawn. Flat sawn is parallel, the wood grain is parallel to the face of the wood whenever you look at the end of the board. What you see on the face of the board is often this cathedral grain-like structure. Rift sawn is at a 45 degree to the face of the board. It can go down to like 30 to like 70. What you'll see on the face of the wood is nice straight grain. Quarter sawn is perpendicular to the face of the wood. Go to 70 degrees on either side. And what you'll see on the face is the medullary rays on a lot of different type of wood. Not all of them, but things like oak are very prominent medullary rays when they're quarter sawn. And the grain structure will be nice and straight. Now, the important thing to understand here is because seasonal shifts in humidity, you will have, the wood is going to move around. And the way it moves around is perpendicular to how the grain structure is. So for something that is flat sawn, when there's more humidity or less humidity, it will start to cup either this way or that way. In rift sawn lumber, it's going to turn into like a parallelogram, where it's going to stretch out this way or narrow out. On quarter sawn, it will go out pretty straight. So in terms of stability when you're building a project, you're mostly looking for rift sawn or quarter sawn lumber, and you're trying to avoid this cathedral grain structure. Now, because of the wood movement in the rift sawn, is very often preferable that you alternate the end grain direction from board to board to help keep it nice and stable and flat. All right, so these are diagrams of how sawmills typically saw their lumber. Again, there's three different terminologies for this, and it kind of conflicts with the previous things I was talking about with the grain structure. We'll talk about that in a little bit. First off, we're going to talk about plain sawn. Then we got true and true and quarter sawn material. Now, there's obviously other ways that these people will saw their lumber. These are the typical ones that you'll see in commercial sawmills. Okay, so most commercial sawmills that does construction lumber will use this type, the plain sawn, of sawing their lumber. What they'll do, they'll cut off their planking on top first, turn the log around, then do the other side, take out planking. Then they'll get their 2x material in the mill, and often you'll have like a 4x4 or 6x6 right at the center where you'll end up seeing, the pit. A second common way that sawmills cut their lumber is a true and true cut, where they'll just cut the log layer by layer by layer by layer. And this is often used for sawing for furniture purposes. The main reason why, because the two middle boards are going to get your quarter sawn grain patterns, because it's going to be nice and straight. These ones over here, your rift sawn is going to be on the outside, and you'll have your cathedral grain or your flat sawn right in the middle. So you'll still have some waste, but most of it is going to be pretty decent. Now we go to the quarter sawn in terms of sawmills. The reason why they call it quarter sawn, because they quarter the wood, And then they often will take one of these quarters and take a slice, flip it, take another slice, flip it, take another slice, like in this V formation. What you end up with is quarter saw material through the center of the boards. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those will have your quarter saw materials. The rest of the boards will mostly be rift sawn. The reason why they don't always do it like this is time consuming. So it's more expensive to cut it like this than to cut it like that. All right, so that's pretty much how logs are sawn. So why is it important to know this? Well, it's pretty obvious that if you buy construction material, material that's been cut for construction purposes, that you'll get a lot of the type of grain that you don't want. And it's going to be less stable for furniture purposes than if you go with flat, true and true or quarter saw material. So it's nice to pay attention to that. Sometimes you don't have much of a choice. You have to go with plain sawn. So, but you just got to know what you're dealing with and try and deal with it appropriately. Okay, we're going to be talking about defects right now. Defects. Okay, so this is a piece of maple. As you can see, we got some sapwood over here. We got a really bad knot with, this is the bark. A lot of times when you see a big black streak going across a piece of wood, it's going to be bark. So you got to watch out for that. That's a defect. In knots, around knots, you want to make sure there's no bark there as well. Cracks like these that go all the way down, and I mean all the way down. A piece of lumber like that, you got to watch out for that. And the way that this is caused, these cracks, is in the drawing process. It's actually following one of the growth lines, the grain orientation of the tree. All right, checking. So checking is cracks at the ends of the boards. It's completely normal. It's created by the drying process. It's good to know about it because if ever you're going to do a project and you want like 5 feet of lumber, you might want to buy a 6-foot board instead of a 5-foot board, because this checking is going to happen. It is pretty clearly going to happen in most wood. Other things is loose knots, like this one. This knot had some bark around it. It's completely gone. If I turn this board around, you'll see the pit of the log. This is one that obviously got eaten up and got sawn through. These are things to look out for when you buy a board. Another thing on this one is, as you can see, this is nice and straight line grain. So this is your rift wood. This here is your cathedral grain, right? So when I bought this piece of wood, I obviously wanted to take out strips of this to work with it. This piece of pine has a nice big defect right there. That's created by the bark. So over here we got a piece of walnut, pretty standard piece of walnut. This here's a heartwood. If you look at the bottom edge, that is sapwood. Now you want to look at both sides, of course, because on the other side it's all sapwood. Now obviously I cut this board and it was better on that edge of it, but this is normal for sapwood, so you want to take a look for sapwood. If you enjoyed this tip, leave us a like, and if you have any problems with your woodworking, leave us a comment down below. We would love to be able to help you out in one of these tip segments.